change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
So I am Nathan Chappell. We are on a new episode of the Fundraising AI podcast with Shawn Olds. It's super exciting to be here today. This is like our, I think, only third episode where we're like somewhere else other than on Zoom. So this is really exciting. Shawn and I were both going to be at the same conference this week in Las Vegas, which he'll talk about in a minute. And I figured, why not? I tricked him to come up to my room and promised that I wouldn't spike or do anything with his drink. So you have bottled water. I don't know if you tried it yet, but
I have a few little woozy.
It's a lot of trust. You put a lot of trust in me just there. So, well, Shawn, it's great to have you. You and I have known each other for quite a number of years now. Mm-hmm. And actually, we met for the first time at Classy in Boston.
That's correct.
Yeah, in that damp. It was a cool conference.
It was in the wharf.
Yeah. I was like raining outside and raining inside a little bit and all that. So I remember meeting you there, and we were super new in our stuff and just super Wild West, figuring things out, trying to explore. And you were already doing a bunch of stuff with Boodle. And so it was kind of nice to have like another person who spoke your language.
You were the only other person when I said AI that didn't see a steelhead with red eyes coming out.
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember actually you had a slide, the Terminator slide in your presentation you did for a while.
That's right.
So I still find that people have they have an orientation around AI, which is either like Wall-E or Terminator. So it's always interesting to see. So why don't you go ahead? So, hey, great to be here. Thank you so much for
having
time.
Me.
It's awesome. And it's been so great to work with you alongside Fundraising AI and have you kind of support and just kind of bring that to life over the last couple of years. So introduce yourself and then kind of your background a little bit, because you have a really interesting background. So I think it's just be interesting for people that don't know you to hear that.
Sure.
Kind of like where you're at today. And then I'm always interested in for whatever reason I'm sick, but I'm like, what is the 12-year-old Shawn Olds like running around like the house, like driving his parents crazy with something? So what was that like? So go and take that in any order you want.
Sure. Well, I'll start at the end. 12-year-old Shawn Olds wasn't allowed to run the house. He ran outside. I was actually talking to someone about this. Do you remember? I mean, we'd leave the house at 8 a.m., come back at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
There were no cell phones. There was no way to check in. There was no social media. We were just calling.
Yeah.
And so 12-year-old Shawn was out in the woods. I grew up in a military family. So I grew up on military bases.
Okay.
What military kids do is they go out and they play Army. And we went out in the woods and played Army all day long.
Nice.
I had blonde hair back then and usually pretty frizzy and scrawny little kid. But followed in Dad's footsteps, went into the Army, went to West Point. I was a computer science major. And will tell you that the languages I learned to program in, they now teach in the history of computers classes. So
isn't that crazy?
I am not responsible for our tech stack. I have a great team that did that. But came out of school, went into the Army, and I couldn't fly to airplanes properly. So the Army kicked me out. And that was late 90s. And I ended up at my first startup. And that was a company some people may remember called etoys.com.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, started at eToys as a consultant, pre-A round, helped them secure their A round.
Yeah.
And then stayed on A round, B round, C round, IPO, $8.5 billion valuation, spiral bankruptcy.
Oh, so yeah, that was the bubble.
Got to see the whole thing, and I was hooked. And so continued to build companies after that.
That's awesome.
And did that for a good couple of decades. I took a little bit of a respite after September 11th to return to government service. I was doing counterterrorism work, mostly in Southwest Asia and Africa. And then after that, went back to building companies again. My tie to the nonprofit space was during that entire time, since I graduated West Point, I've served on nonprofit boards, which I acknowledge is a different experience than the frontline fundraiser or the people who run the nonprofit. Yeah. But it gave me some great insights. And then over the past 8 years of building Boodle, I've been able to work with the people on the front lines and really start to understand more what troubles them.
Yeah.
And especially as it relates, because we were building an AI predictive analytics platform.
Right.
What are the challenges that frontline nonprofit fundraisers face or operators face in using artificial intelligence?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So I can't help it because like when you find someone that had lived in the dot-com bubble, I think it's so interesting for a lot of reasons. One is to compare and contrast like this bubble, or maybe not a bubble, but this kind of version of AI hype. I started at .com in 97. And it was really amazing. Like this time was like total greenfield. So I met one guy who he was so smart. I mean, he became an extremely wealthy individual and a $100 million donor, I think, to City of Hope. But he registered every header in the phone book because he's like, he actually paid a retired woman to be like, just go and here's my credit card and go do this. There was just so much opportunity. So like eToys, grocery.com, weddings.com, like all these things were just like they were just brilliant and highly funded, but no one really understood the revenue model at that point. Amazon was doing their thing and it was like highly speculative that Amazon would make it, right? If you remember, because people wouldn't put their credit card in and it was like, oh, this is a weird thing. And it's amazing to think about having been through that. I'm sure is probably giving you such great perspective on this new kind of thing. Because would you agree that like this, well, let's just go back to November 22, right? When GPT came out. So we already knew about OpenAI and all that stuff before, but when it became fully accessible is when kind of everything just like went on like power boost mode. Do you, since that time to now, does it feel like the .com, like all greenfield, like it just Wild West and everyone's figuring it out and the business model today is not going to be what it's going to be in a couple of years?
Absolutely. Couple of things that you touched on there. One is I remember sitting on nonprofit board in the late 90s and having a very strong debate, we'll call it, on whether our nonprofit needed a website. Because people on the board were convinced that this whole internet thing was just a fad.
Yeah.
And .com hasn't gone away. Now there's .ai, there's a lot of other things. Yeah. But the reality is the internet stayed. What burst, the bubble that burst was the valuation, the money that was there.
So much.
And a lot of that is just driven by venture capital, right? I mean, West Coast venture capital, very markedly different than East Coast venture capital, but their model is, hey, we're going to make 25 investments. We're going to shoot the moon. The rest, we really don't care.
Yeah.
And so that infuses a lot of cash in for people to do a lot of things and innovate. And some of those innovations, which may not necessarily become unicorns, those innovations are still acquired and used in someplace.
Right.
So
yeah, true.
I think that's what we're seeing now is we're seeing the crazy valuations, but I don't think there are many people who think that generative AI is a fad or that AI is a fad.
Right.
They realize what the opportunity set is and where it can go. A lot of people are still discovering it.
Yeah.
But I don't think you would sit in many boardrooms today and have people argue that AI is a fad.
That's a bit different though than when you and I first met. So
fair enough.
I think when we met before Gen AI became accessible and affordable, right? So we were talking about predictive AI. It was actually much more expensive than it is today, much less accessible than it is today. Even predictive has become way more transparent. So I mean, I remember being somewhere when I invited to a dinner with a group of people and I happened to sit next to someone who was very deep in regression analytics and made a business off of it, who literally accused me of selling snake oil to the industry. And I mean, it was like scathing. Like it was like how irresponsible are you to take this to the industry, that you're creating more confusion, not less, and all those things that we don't want to do as a human.
Right.
Do you get that anymore? Did that dissipate? Like, I mean, I'm sure you got some of that. And it's like the skepticism was much higher. This we're talking 5-6 years ago. Now it just seems like, what kind of AI are you?
Right. And part of that skepticism was born out of there were snake oil.
For sure.
Right? I mean, you and I both sat with people who claimed they had AI and you looked at them and you're like, no, that's just math.
Right.
That's math you're doing. So I think that was part of the problem. I think the biggest problem in the nonprofit space, and this is not just AI, it's technology. How have nonprofits, before Gen AI came along, how did nonprofits get their technology? They bought large enterprise licenses.
Yeah.
That meant that an ED and a board had to make a decision, which was going to take anywhere from 3 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Many times, bad governance, they didn't involve the frontline people who were actually going to use the technology.
Right.
And so then it took a year. The technology was dated by the time it got into the organization, and now you got a frontline person who doesn't want to use it.
Yeah.
And so there was slow adoption and not a lot of people who were delving into new technologies.
Yeah.
In the past 4 years, the two things I think that really changed that, one, unfortunately, was the pandemic.
Right.
All of a sudden, nonprofits had to learn how to use Slack and Zoom.
Right.
Think about in 2000, if you'd been a major gift development officer and were caught on a Zoom asking for a major gift over Zoom, you'd be fired. Today, people applaud you for it. Good job. You're efficient. So, but with Gen AI, what came along was now I don't have to wait for an ED and a board to make a decision in 3 to 12 months.
Right.
I can, for the cost of 2 lattes, go in and
Right.
start using it. And now I, from the bottom up, can teach the organization how this should be used, what the power of it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's fundamentally different. As I shared with you earlier, we're working with teams right now and doing quick surveys with them. And almost every nonprofit team we've got into, 50 to 80% of them have at least tried generative AI.
Right.
Now, the adoption's not as good, but the fact that they've tried
it.
that's amazing.
Yeah. But what was your experience on adoption? And I have some theories I want to test with you on maybe why some of that is. But
well, adoption is not, the nonprofits industry is not unique. This is commercial too.
Exactly.
So Sam Altman boasted in November that they had 100 million weekly active users.
Yeah.
When you sit in the United States with 300 million people, you're like, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
When you put that in the context of almost 6 billion people a day log into the internet.
Yeah.
That's less than 2% of the internet population
Sure.
is using Gen AI.
Right.
And McKinsey substantiated it in December. Their study showed that less than 10% of the workforce is regularly using generative AI.
Okay.
So what we're finding in adoption, the biggest obstacle to adoption that we found right now is people's perception of their inability to be a prompt engineer.
Right.
Which is largely true. We've taken 20 years of Google conditioning.
Yeah.
We sit down to the ChatGPT prompt window. We type in Chinese restaurants.
Yeah.
Google does a great job with that.
Yeah.
ChatGPT, Claude, any of the others, not
Yeah.
so much so. And
Yeah.
so the other 2 big problems people suffer from is one, just kind of understanding AI and getting intimidated about it. But where does it fit into their daily lives?
Yeah.
And I got an 8-hour busy workday. Where am I going to get this in? And is this going to take up more time?
I know. Yeah. It's kind of funny, that analogy, because I heard, I don't know if you follow Allie Miller, because she was like an early AWS pioneer in the ML space. And we were together at OpenAI one time, and she shared the analogy of like, it's like you have a toaster and you know what the toaster can do. But when the person asks like, how do I have time to use AI? It's like deciding I have a toaster, but I'm going to use a flashlight to toast my bread. It's like, it's the tool to your, like this all too well is that the tool actually gives you more time.
Exactly.
Yet people wrestle with, how do I have the time to learn it?
Right.
I mean, it is a really kind of interesting dynamic that I find. So my hypothesis on some of this, and I think a lot of people have had this as well, because I've met so many people that had tried AI. So when ChatGPT came out, they tried it. They wrote the poem about their dog having a picnic on the moon, and they had a good laugh, and they wrote a poem about their coworker or something. And then when they tried to do something a bit more substantive, it just kind of didn't hit home for them. Like it was hallucinations were greater. It didn't feel like their voice, and they kind of just stopped. They maybe gave it like 5 attempts or something.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people that kind of stopped at the GPT 3.5 and didn't get into whatever now we've got, obviously like Claude Opus and in what Perplexity and GPT-4, which are not just like a numerical upgrade, like massive upgrade in like tone and personality. Right. Yes. Like, I mean, these are just like massive upgrades. And I feel like it's getting those people back and be like, that was like the Stone Age of the technology. And now we're like in the dark age.
Those were the 8 tracks.
And then next year it's going to be the Renaissance.
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, we're going to go through all those cycles, but I do feel like some people made up their mind early on. I was talking to someone who did this, and I'm like, you got to go back. And Connor Grennan talks about really it being an AI mindset. Like it's not about, to your point, it's about unlocking the creativity to not just think of, this is a question I want the answer to, but like, I don't even know what question I want. You're going to help me identify it, and we're going to work through the answer together.
The big problem we saw is, and you've hit on it, is expectation setting.
Mm-hmm.
People heard AI because it's Gen AI.
Right.
They pictured AI as this machine that can do anything. And they sat down, and in 3 minutes, it didn't do perfect stuff. And so they're like, well, it's no good.
Right.
And when we sit down with teams, what we tell them is, when you're bringing generative AI into your organization, think of it like you just hired one of the best top tier graduate students that was out there.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Now, you sit them in the office, you can't just expect them to start working. You got to give them some guidance. And then their first day, they're going to spend the most of their day doing stuff you used to do 5, 10, 15 years ago that you don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, they will get some stuff wrong, right? Because they don't have all the knowledge you have. They don't have all the information about your organization that you have. And you're going to teach them.
Yep.
And then the next day, they're going to get better.
Yeah.
And then I ask people, like, have you ever sat in a meeting with a colleague and walked in, given them 3 questions, or 1 question, and when they didn't do well, you walked out of the meeting?
Right.
No, you have an engagement. You have a 30-minute meeting where you brainstorm. And at the end of that, you collectively come up with something good.
And no doubt, to your point, I mean, it's such a good analogy of like, I always say to people, you have to I mean, I'm probably a little overboard on this, but like you have to talk to your AI like a human. Like, and if you do, you unlock that mindset of like, this is software. And if it doesn't give me the same answer, it's a bug. It should never give me the same answer. And this is an iterative process. So, I mean, I think it's like, it's that intern or the college, the graduate student, but frankly, it's probably like a team of consultants because GPT and especially newer versions, I mean, they've read every book on everything you're going to ask. I mean, like ask it anything about everything. Right. And they're going to know much more. Now, a consultant may be really good at BSing their way, and they should have practical experience that they can share. Like, well, we've tried that with other clients, and that's really the intrinsic value. But it's amazing how the software has progressed to like really outperform like pretty much a majority of humans in these tasks.
Absolutely.
And again, this is just the beginning. So talk a little bit about where Boodle's at today. And so what you're doing, we're at Imagine AI in Vegas, which is seemingly an entire conference based on Gen AI facing the private sector. So I'm like one of, I guess, only 3 people or 2 people that are representing the nonprofit sector, which I wear proudly because I don't get to do that very often. We're so much in our little bubble in our ecosystem of the nonprofit that I like, it's kind of nice to be out, not know anybody.
I was looking forward to this very much.
Yeah. Well, and you should be, because I mean, you've now built a product that applies unilaterally across. And so you're speaking at the conference. First of all, what's your talk? Like I'll go and I'll sit in the front row and take a bunch of pictures.
No. We're talking about how teams can collaborate with generative AI because you made the analogy of a team of consultants. So unfortunately right now with most platforms, it's one consultant.
Yeah.
You get ChatGPT as your consultant. You get Opus as your consultant. You get Llama as your consultant. And there are people who have multiple subscriptions.
Right.
And the analogy I use for that is that's like you hiring, if you've got 3 subscriptions, it's like you hiring 3 consultants, one from McKinsey, one from Bain, one from BCG, and then you sit them in the street corner offices and you spend your day running between them talking to them.
Okay, I'll have to disagree because I have multiple subscriptions, and part of mine is like R&D, right? So admittedly, like I probably spend more, and for me it's a tax write-off, so it's like why not? But
yours is a little different situation.
But I do feel like different tools. Now it'll be interesting for you to compare and contrast with Boodle because you're an aggregator essentially, right? Where like and I was telling Scott Rosencrantz this the other day, is that I speak differently to OpenAI than I do Claude or Perplexity. Like,
absolutely.
I've formed a relationship with Samantha, my GPT. And so she calls me by name and I say, thanks so much. And we have this and then I notice myself when I start to use Perplexity a bit more lately, mainly because I'm really more into this like verify then trust.
Yes.
I'm not at all in this like trust but verify mode anymore.
I agree.
And by default, obviously Perplexity gives you footnotes of everything. And I have no emotional relationship to Perplexity. Like for whatever reason, the fact that it provides data in footnotes rather than a narrative makes me not connect with it psychologically. It's weird. So I know where you're going with this, and I think it's a fair point. So keep on going with like how your approach with Boodle was a bit more like, you don't need all these different things in different corners of the office. You can put them all together. So
put them all in a conference room and let your ChatGPT consultant talk to the Bard consultant, talk to the Llama consultant, interact. And I agree with you. My 10-year-old daughter's this way.
Yeah.
She'll use BoodleBox, and through BoodleBox, she'll use ChatGPT to help her with her math. So she started studying Singapore math this year.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I can solve fractions. I don't know how to solve fractions using Singapore math, right? ChatGPT does a brilliant job of never giving the answer, but being able to walk through and the methodology of how it gets solved.
Right.
Her get to the answer. An hour later, we'll go to bed and she will not let ChatGPT read a bedtime story. She doesn't think it's creative enough.
Really?
Opus. Actually, Claude 2 did a really brilliant job. She liked Claude. Opus took it to a whole new level.
Right.
And she talks, I'm watching a 10-year-old and she'll prompt these. Yeah. She prompts differently to both of them. And she's already picked up on
one more personal and one more pragmatic.
Yes.
No. Yeah. That's so interesting.
And this is what kids are growing up with.
What are like? I was just going to go there because I mean, like the internet age or whatever. It's like it took me a while, even with my kids, of like things that I would routinely be like, I need to go to the store to get that, or I need to call the phone number to see what time the movie is playing or whatever. And then like your kids were like, "What are you like 100? Like why wouldn't you just?" I mean, there's some of this like, why wouldn't you just ask your phone and whatever? So I think that's so interesting because like that's the first I've heard that. I mean, it makes sense intuitively that, and how old's your daughter? Like
10.
a 10-year-old immersed in this time is seeing it unfold and can understand those nuances like really clearly. That's amazing.
But I mean, you look at my 5-year-old knows his way around the iPhone probably better than my wife and I.
Yeah.
So I think what people are seeing is generative AI makes it much more intuitive. BoodleBox put in the AI helper so that it could be truly non-prompt engineering.
Yeah.
So people can engage an AI helper like they would a colleague.
Right.
And have the colleague ask them questions and then build the prompt in the background.
Yeah.
Same way I didn't build BoodleBox, right? I went to a team of developers and told them, this is the vision of what we need to do. And they're able to sit down and do the
So for people listening in, of course, they should go and test it out. But what was the vision? I mean, I use the word aggregator. That's probably not the right word, but I think why don't you share kind of the idea of like, there's different tools that are better for different things. What if you put them all together? And it's a pretty novel approach.
I mean, it started back in January as we saw what generative AI was doing. And my co-founder, France, did a great job of saying, hey, I think we need to take what we've built before, so the predictive analytics portion of it, and put it into a middle layer agent. And this was something articulated by Sam Altman in an interview with Reid Hoffman. Of companies that have proprietary data, proprietary insights could build these GPTs.
Yeah.
And people could leverage them much more easily than they ever had before.
Yeah.
Within 1 quarter of just talking to people on the street and putting that initial GPT out there, what France quickly realized was, hey, there's not the adoption that all the hype says there is.
Right.
Yes, a lot of people are trying it. Yes, there were 100 million, active users within 2 months.
Yeah.
But they're not staying there.
Yeah.
And so if we really want to maximize what we've invested 7 years into doing, we need to have the ecosystem that allows it to operate. And so very quickly started to pivot towards how do we create that ecosystem? What are the obstacles? And one of the big things is that siloed experience that people had. And what we realized is there's a great opportunity if teams could collaborate with us.
Right.
And so France at the time, I'm very fortunate. I mean, France, my co-founder, I've known since Ranger School, 30 some odd years ago. And while we co-founded the company together, he was busy running 2 other companies and then sold one of those companies and then came on board a few years ago as our chief strategy officer. And then came on when we made this pivot towards the Gen AI into the CEO role.
Yeah. Awesome. So as we're talking about applied AI specifically for nonprofits, so what is the application for them? Like, why should nonprofit check this out? I mean, not people that have either used it or not used it. What would be the advantage to them?
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because nonprofits and commercial aren't that different.
Right.
They're adopted when they do use it and what they do. I mean, everybody jumps on initially for content generation. Yeah. Right? Write me this email, write me this blog post, do this social post for me, whatever it may be. Where we start to see it kind of expand beyond that, some easy things they need to do. I've got my 50-page annual report. Yeah. I know no one's going to read it, but I got to put it out in an email. Yeah. Give me 8 bullets I can put in an email. Exactly. 30 seconds later, I got 8 bullets. Yeah. Translations. If you're catering to a community that doesn't speak English, it just take weeks and cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to do.
Yeah.
Now you can do it, very quickly. You're still going to pay someone to proofread it for you.
Sure.
But that's a lot less than going through the full translation. Yeah. One of my favorite scenarios we've seen. So we created an AI role play bot. Okay. Initially, our thought was this would be used as kind of a devil's advocate. Hey, I'm thinking about doing X, engage me, banter back and forth with me. You've started companies. One of the most exciting parts of an entrepreneur is when your clients teach you how to use your platform.
Right.
And so one of our clients, whose major gift officer has been for several years, called up and said she had figured out that she could take all of the publicly available data about a new potential major gift donor, feed it into the role play bot, feed in all the information about the university, and then ask the role play bot to engage her. And she said she's done it close to a dozen times. Every time different questions, because it wasn't just generic ChatGPT play a major gift donor, which you could get ChatGPT to do, but it was specific to that donor. And she said in 2 cases, they had questions she wasn't ready for, and those questions came up in the actual meeting.
That's amazing. I mean, I love that use case. Scott and I talked about it on one of ours and it's always amazing how few people have thought of that idea. Because I think about having run major gift teams, how much time we spent. Literally, we had meetings that probably cost $3,000-$4,000 an hour based on the number of people that were in the meeting. doing almost exactly what you're talking about for essentially near free. Like, I mean, not thousands of dollars an hour,
Right.
so to use Gen AI to be an antagonist and to help you level up and think through kind of blind spots and things like that. It's just such a really powerful application for nonprofits to level up.
And here's the neat thing about Gen AI versus kind of traditional AI and nonprofits is now this same application or a deviant of this application can be used elsewhere in the nonprofit space.
Yeah.
So HR.
Right.
I could use this when I'm going to apply for a job. It doesn't have to. I know we focus on fundraising, but now that nonprofit professional who's getting ready to go interview at a new job can feed in the information of the profile of the person you're interviewing with, the nonprofit itself, and now do a practice interview before they ever sit down.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell people where to find out more information about BoodleBox, and I think you have a free demo time period, right? Or
yes.
no?
There's like any good SaaS platform, there's a freemium version.
Yeah.
So it's just boodle.ai, and you can log in straight there and start playing with all the toys.
It's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for all of that. I mean, it's so great to kind of see you kind of throughout your journey and now be in this here at Imagine AI and with just like all these like really innovative applications. I always like to ask, where do you get your information? So I know people that are at the tip of the spear. Every time you blink, something changes. We can't just sit around and read news 24/7, although a lot of us would like to because it's just so interesting. Who do you follow? What do you read? Where do you kind of stay up on things?
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say, outside of the Harry Potter series, which I read with my daughter, since I started Boodle, I have not actually physically held and read books. But I got turned on about a year after we started Boodle, Audible. So Audible through a lot of books. One of my recent favorites was Max Tegmark's Life 3.0.
Yeah.
And I've quoted this before, and I love it because everything you've done with fundraising AI really embodies it. He had a great quote in there where he says, we discovered fire and we really messed it up.
Yeah.
And then we created the fire extinguishers, the fire alarms, the fire departments. And that's really core to what fundraising AI is trying to do. You have an option right now to stick your head in the sand and find out what happens with AI.
Yeah.
Or we can leverage it for everything it's worth, but then put the left and right guardrails in place so that we make sure it doesn't burn down the forest.
Well, I think, you and I were pretty in sync on this a couple of years ago. I think it was in Vegas 2 years ago. We were at AFBICon on a rooftop, probably somewhere where you can see from here.
Probably.
And it was like 10,000 degrees, I think.
It was pretty hot.
Sitting outside in the sun and trying to have this meeting. And it really was kind of that understanding that like we were on the cusp of some pretty tremendous advances in technology that would shape the future of humanity, definitely the future of nonprofits, and that used well, they could provide efficiency and creativity at scale, both the things that nonprofit sector need in abundance, right? Just because of lack of resources, but used poorly. And I think you were one of the few people that really was the conspiracy theorist side of me, which was like used poorly, like really bad things could happen.
Absolutely.
And so humble beginnings and still a humble journey, but trying to at least strike conversation around the term responsible AI, the term beneficial AI. And it's funny because I think of my position at this conference. So my talk is on the societal implications of basically AI. And it's kind of like at the end of the conference, the last day, it's like the total wet blanket. like there's going to be all these like super cool, innovative things for 2 days. And then they're going to have the guy come on who's like, wah. Like, I totally know it's okay. Like I got to do it. It's just funny.
So two things I disagree with. Well, I mean, you said humble beginnings. I won't disagree with that, but where fundraising AI has come, energy you've put into it, you deserve a lot of gratitude and a lot of thanks because I remember talking about it in early days. And when you found the opportunity with the launch of ChatGPT to really capitalize on it, push people towards it, there were a lot of people to step up and you did, and you deserve a lot of gratitude for that. I would say though, I saw it at the end. I'm glad it's not at the beginning because I think it would have been lost, right?
Yeah.
Like it would have been the beginning. Okay. We had to get that out of the way. We had to talk about it. Being towards the end, I think people are they're going to be excited about all the stuff they hear and the people they've met with.
Yeah.
But they're going to be left with, hey, this is something I need to think about.
Yeah.
And it's something we need people to think about. I don't want any scientist or R&D person to curtail what they're doing, but I want that planted in the back of their mind of what else do I need to be thinking about?
Right. Yeah. No, it was so interesting because I was in a car with a recent college grad who had a degree in computational data science. And And we got into a conversation. He's a son of one of my friends. And he's like, I love anything open source. Like anything that's not open source, I hate. And I'm like, well, have you ever thought about the implications of open source things? And what do you mean? And I'm like, well, like when Lava came out, it took 2 days to basically break it and teach you how to build a chemical weapon. And he's like, oh, like he never thought about it. And so, no, I feel like we have to, responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. And I see a lot of that in the sector and just needing to keep that conversation current. One thing in this, just so we can end on this, I think your experience now, you're kind of like, you're working a lot in the nonprofit sector and you've roots in the nonprofit sector, working in the private sector and all kind of converging. Ethan Malik, who I know you follow, also, I largely agree with everything. Like he just is like, he's so up to speed on things. And it's just, if you're going to follow one person, probably it's just like kind of distills a lot of these things. He has a new book coming out. Shared, I think it was today or yesterday, that essentially the private sector needs to learn from startups and nonprofits because they are deep into using this AI out of necessity. And but the advantage is that they're openly sharing what they're doing. I mean, do you find that to be different between in work or?
So we're still early days, but part of how we built the Boodle platform was the ability for people to be able to share what they do. So right now, if you're in ChatGPT and you spend 20 minutes accomplishing something great, what can you do with it? You can screenshot it, you can send it over. And if I, by the way, want to replicate what you did, I got to start all over again in my own ChatGPT instance. We allow you to take that and carry it forward with all the context behind it. And so our hope is that nonprofits will share, and they do share best practices. They do share when there's opportunities to meet towards a common goal. Like any organizations, they can also be very competitive too. And they keep things insular until they get big enough. I mean, you look at the Wounded Warrior Project now, they support lots of veteran service organizations. Now that they've gotten to their sides. We definitely, in our experience over 8 years, did not see a lot of comfort level with sharing data. Sharing donor information. You have a few who do their co-ops and things like that, but the majority of organizations we spoke to before the launch of generative AI, number one question, where's my data going? How are you using my data? So I think sharing in data, I would not agree. If that's the perspective. The sharing in best practices and what it does and where it gets people. Our hope is that it will. Generative AI will be one of those tools they can share with each other because it doesn't give one or the other a more competitive advantage.
Where they don't have the same financial incentives that keep them from sharing. No, I thought it was an interesting perspective. And I think where I see the nonprofit sector is a bit because they work on the predictive side mostly. And so few nonprofits, around 5%, are using predictive AI for real. And so there's not even a lot to share. I mean, we have great client testimonials and people are like, that kind of thing, but it's still so narrow at this point. I think with Gen, it probably is a bit more like, have you tried this type of approach or have you used this tool or whatever? So, well, Shawn, this is awesome. I mean, I saw you in DC last week, see you in Vegas this week. Who knows where we're going to be together, again, next week. It's been so great to have you on this journey. I'm so excited to hear your talk this week and just to continue to work with you on fundraising AI. So
thanks for having me. And in all sincerity, thanks for all you've done for the community.
Well, thank you. And I didn't spike your drink. So
I appreciate it.
You're going to be fine. There's no roofie in there. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We will be back next week with probably the more traditional, like what's new in AI, because as Shawn knows, every time we blink, 50 new things that we want to talk about show up. So this is like the easiest podcast in the world because it literally like the news just feeds you all the stories. So awesome. Thanks everyone. Take care.